art, and it's kind of a tricky question because I think the only person who tried to define what Kongo art is here in this room is Magafi in a couple of decades ago. It's been a very problematic term for the field of African art. I think it's kind of challenging for me to try to propose there is such a thing as Kongo art when we try to define that, not just in Africa in relation to African diaspora. And what that means, art as a term, to have comes with a lot of connotations and bias in relation to what we define as civilization. And the first things I have this image from Carlos Taylor. This is 1667, and it's a travel narrative type of book. It was designed to inform the people when they travel the world. It's more like kind of a tourist kind of guide being produced in the 17th century. But it shows you pretty much the kind of relationship between the civilized space and the non-civilized space. It's very obvious in the right of the image that contracted in a very specific way. The nakedness versus dress up is one position that sometimes we use to define who is modern and civilized and who is not. What had to do, I think, the implication, the definition of civilization, of humanity, if you go back to the definition of humanity. And I'm thinking that in Hegel have a profound implication in the way we think about this particular term and affects sometimes the way we think about African art within art history as a discipline. I think the comments being raised by Hegel in somehow made us think about the way European culture, related and view the African subject, specific the lack of understanding of having a god, a particular beings, centralized, omnipotent, omnipresent God, as that kind of absentee prevents African culture to endorse, to be part of this idea of humanity and civilizations, or the distinction between the notions that they have to do with proximity to nature as one qualified traits that separate African from European definitions of what humanity means and civilization. And this idea of I think, raised from Hegel to begin with, that forced us to think about the important term we use most of the time to define African as a space of inquiry, a space of thinking, magical, mystical, irrational, therefore inferior, dark, savage, and primitive. The being term that somehow resonates in the definition of discipline, and plays an important role in defining what is Africa, how you think about Africa as a space of knowledge and meaning. But in art history, in the cases of discipline, I pretty much central. I was trained in the department of art history, but my relationship had to do with defined by other disciplines, anthropology, history, linguistics. It's still pretty much ruled by important themes, and somehow we haven't managed a way to deal with them in a more productive way. Authenticity, technique, authenticity, permanence, theory, and ideology, they are important concepts that somehow prevent us to talk about Africa, because this term in a way gravitate the whole discourse of what is African art. And African, the tension between what is art and culture is very present in the way we think about the study of that particular space. And this complex relationship with human experience, and that the default assumption we make between African culture is defined by that relationship with nature. And that connection between what is culture and art, culture in somehow is defined by kind of natural understanding. Our history is synonymous of the history of the West. It's just the way sometimes we see as a default trajectory of Africa is in embracing, in the case of Africa right now, the case of Africa is contemporary practice is kind of the desire, is the kind of trajectory most of this place would want it to be. And there is a serious problem in the way the curriculums are designed in places like UCT and Kongo University in South Africa. All as humans, there is modernity is the final, the final stuff in artistic and social practices in those, or the transition between primitivism and modernism in Africa is something we promote and endorse in many different ways. The first thing is not to do with what I think is the quest for the art of people without history. This is something, in a way, being embraced through many different disciplines. The idea of thinking about writing as a quintessential example of documenting your history, your presence in the history of humanity. And we think sometimes of writing as a repository of our memory as a social being. And that means you have writings, you are civilized, you are humans, and you don't have it, pretty much maybe the other side of that kind of dichotomy. Death of history, or traditions, a very contested term that sometimes we don't know how to, when we use traditional art, it comes with a lot of negative connotation. And we never really give the right to African art to be historical in any way. In the case of our history, the kind of use of language is very problematic. Well, Kongo culture is present in the Americas. They found a way to recreate their own cultural practices in the diaspora. They arrive and they decide to stay. They negotiate slavery, social disempowerment, political disruptions, hybrid criminalization, all the problem that comes to be when you are dislocated from your own culture paradigm and being forced by important mechanisms like deculturations and slavery. And also they learn how to coexist with other African people and other type of culture in the diaspora. I mean, it's the question about being Kongo culture is a problem because we are not really sometimes, the way we talk about is Kongo influence in the diaspora. We never really give it the right of Kongo to be the culture, and that I think is a problem specifically in the diaspora studies. That also is another problem that arises when you are in the diaspora and writing about African tradition in diaspora versus being an Africanist, writing about an African subject in relation to African people. That separation is still present day in the history, in the field of African art, and they are not. We cannot reconcile these two fields of studies still. And how we think about Kongo art beyond the historical, social, cultural evidence, how the artistic practice defined in maybe in opposition or in relation to Western culture. That is something we need to start to write about. And if there is possible to talk about a specific artistic principle that only can be used to define what is Kongo art, that could be used to talk about Kongo practices in both sides of the Atlantic. And how this idea of Kongo American art fit into these new developments, a new narrative about Africa as something that includes the diaspora, should include the diaspora. But the Kongo culture faced a series of traumatic events. And you can see in the three images on the top, this consistent destruction of Kongo culture. This is from Pigafetta, from Kawasi, an anonymous photograph from the 19th century. All of the photographs show exactly the same thing. Or object being burned, being destroyed by very specific exercise, by a culture from outside arriving to those places and destroying, burning to the ground. That forced us to believe that tradition being completely destroyed, decimated. There is no way you can recreate the Kongo tradition. Or another important social issue that has to do with superstition. We use the term of witchcraft or black magic that is somehow demonized any kind of remnants of this Kongo tradition. These two operators together pretty much prevent me to articulate this idea of a Kongo culture, the Kongo art. But then we have a systemic almost 500 years of destructions of Kongo, but the Kongo art managed to survive those layers of destructions under us. And this is an example I show you. This is exactly from the same cartographer that shows the way African people being embodied, being depicted. So a specific type of art, like cartography and printmaking, and the idea of being wild, savage, and it's very evident in this type of image. Or you have what I call, well, I didn't call this my advisor, Robert Forrest Thompson, called Hollywood fantasy, and specifically this image from I Walk with the Zombie from 1943. That there's you see the clear section from that image that represents a zombie. The zombie is a very unique word that comes from Zambi, that means God in Kongo, being translated. Zombie have a very specific connotation in popular culture, that being in somehow you are controlled by someone else, the power of the minds, and then link back to the issues of witchcraft and black magic. This is the way Western culture depicted African Congo-based tradition in the diaspora, and we are informed by those layers of changes and valorization of Congo practice. Otherness and orientation, and you have examples of notating Congo people in the diaspora. This is from Albert Eckhout, a Congo woman with a child, 1664. This is from La Paix, that represented African people as animal. And the last one, the mockery, 3 different ways to depict African subject matter in the diaspora. People with history, and you have the history. It's not about the deficit model, that only people being forced through the slave trade as being enslaved, they arrive to those places without culture, without memory. Then I will show you the different storyline that talk about people with agency, the different type of agencies that is not being enslaved. That is somehow we have trouble to recognize. And the idea of a deficit model that has to do with the idea of empty head and empty-handed. I think African people arrive without a suitcase to the diaspora, and they didn't have the mind to empower their own cultural reconstructions in the diaspora. But this is, I think, one of the few examples depicting an object that somehow resembles an object from Central Africa. And this is from 1666 from Jan van Castle, and you can see the details on the right. And there's a painting that has to do with Brazil. There's 3 continents, but that particular image has to do with Brazil, with African people in Brazil. You can see the detail on the right. Or you have other Africans traveling into the Americas, specifically Latin America. Or you have this need, specifically German traveler, German artists, depicting something important in the present day understanding of African contributions to cultures in America, like music and dance, specific body language. And you can trace each of these body positions to a specific body gesture in the Congo tradition present day. And that is what I think is important. It's kind of accidental ethnography in a way. But what I have here is just an example from La Paix, and I show a very specific trace, a specific signifier that in somehow you can connect back to the history of Congo tradition, specifically when it's associated with the royalty. Or you can also think about the diaspora. These 2 people in the black, this headdress feather, they are African American that went to Cuba to fight in the Cuban side in the 19th century. And you have pretty much that tradition as an Nganga from the Congo, as a postcard, anonymous postcard. This is an illustration from medical books I found at Yale that represent the relationship between Nganga, a German doctor who was in Central Africa, and tried to find evidence that how Central African traditional medicine can help German traditions. Very, very important example. Or you have the diaspora and Jean-Baptiste Debré, and the black witch doctor. The caption is horrible, but that really, in the end, this is a kind of contradiction in the way the caption being used with these kind of images that is going to highlight this negative view of the other, the European, into this African subject in the diaspora. But what you see in this image, I think is very important, is a doctor, one in Uganda, in the diaspora, who is enclosing himself into a circle. He's making a circle to protect himself. And circle used here as a geometric shape to empower, to protect his identity, his physical identity. And this is Brazil. Many island syndrome, that is I come from a place that has a lot of problems, a lot of syndrome, like Cuba. This is a place that we think we invented everything. And this kind of egotistic approach is very present in many Cubans, even when they leave the country. Many Cubans who study Kongo tradition, they believe they invented this prototype of Kongo practice. They use a cauldron. The cauldron was a Dutch, a very important prototype of the design introduced by the Dutch in Cuba in the 16th century to crystallize the sugar. And that being used later in the Congo. Palamonte is the name of the Congo tradition in Cuba. And Cuba claimed they invented that particular form of Congo understanding. So I can show you here, but Cuba doesn't have a copyright with that. It's pretty much, you can see, this is 1687 from Cavazzi, I'm sorry, depicting the important scenes. The prince is trying to make the rains come down. And you have the two helpers of the princes helping the whole process. But the funny thing for me is that you have in an early cartography, when you read the evidence from Cavazzi, the limitation with the language. And Cavazzi said, I do not understand how, I don't know in my own language how to represent what happened. I do not understand this kind of reality. And he decided to use a visual language to codify this new reality. And sometimes we read those images, but we don't read the caption that comes with that image. And as part of the history of cartography, these two relationships, that was critical. But here, smoke is very important. And smoke used as a code and fire to represent the power of making rain. And you have an outside European traveler, cartographer, using a specific visual language of European tradition to represent a reality that he doesn't understand. And for me, this is an important moment in developing critical theory that has to do with the relationship and encounter with other culture. And this example of the cauldron model, in this case made of ceramic, this anonymous postcard. They are part of the Smithsonian collections, and you can see even in the postcard being produced by Portuguese and French. They've been deployed in these colonial spaces to send it back to the family. You can read in the back personal postcard sent to wife and brothers and sister. And just as detail, you can see the container, the idea of the prototype of the container, the cauldron, that is important in the Cuban economic development from the 16th century. All this is important here, but it's a container, a religious container. The container had to do with the principle of the Congo, of religion and Congo culture. And you can see on the right, this is Sarabanda, is the god of cutting edge of irons in the Congo tradition in Cuba. And you can see pretty much the continuity rather than sense of innovations and that Cuban claims when they talk about Congo tradition in Cuba. And this is another example from Prenda, and Kisi would be Shola and Wenge. Shola is the corruptions of Kikongo, and Zola, I mean love in Kikongo sense of the Kikongo variation of Kikongo. People speak in Basso Congo area. And the sister of love, pretty much is what the translation is Spanish and Kikongo being spoken in Cuba from the 19th century. But this one is important because it's not just a container as a prototype. We have a Congo graphic writing system called Signature. You can find, they have more than 50,000 symbols. If you are a practitioner, you need to know the symbols by memory when you are training the traditions. And this is the name of that particular Nkisi or Prenda. In a way, you have the actual aesthetic of the object, ceramic, the color, it's called codification that tell you exactly the name, and you have the graphic writing system to reinforce the actual identity of this object. And there's another one that represents freshwater of the ocean, Balwende, or but the idea of a container is very important throughout the whole Kongo religious principle. And the idea of one of the problem I found when someone starts explaining how you understand your own Kongo traditions. And sometimes we have an idea, a prefix idea about what an object should look like, and we're looking for models, or we're looking for a Ferrari. You want an idea of Ferrari, you have a Ferrari from the present day. But you don't, and we try to find that type of Ferrari previous years, like 50 years ago. But you don't think about what a Ferrari do, what is a Ferrari as an object, as a thing. And that is just the way I try to do it, try to understand a particular type of object. I try to understand a tradition that allows that object to exist within a particular set of principles. And this is, in a way, this is what I try to understand, it's my own traditions, because many of the things I memorized, someone told me how to do it, but I wasn't really able to go back and study in the first place. The idea of a container, and a kisi supu, that is very important because it's cloth and bread that you use to seal particular vibrations of energy to one side. And you can find this idea of enclosing or embodiments. You have this cloth in this case, and this is African American when you have those nkisi hangs on the roof. And this is a very important type of nkisi, bumba, that you can maybe trace the etymology of the word in bumba, that means secret, can be understood as a secret in Congo. And it's used by a Jewish community in Cuba that practice the Kongo traditions, and it hangs on the top of the roof and activated when you the actual object touched the floor. Very important, you will find a type of bumba in places like the Bronx, and now you can find it in Los Angeles. The Kongo member that went to the diaspora. But the idea of mestizaje, civilization, hybridity, syncretism, transculturation is a very important term we use, but sometimes we never really explain what the meaning is. And we think they are changeable. We think mestizaje and civilization, they are pretty much the same thing. And each is just trying to have a very different trajectory. It means completely different things. And also we apply that to African tradition and African aesthetic without really understanding the implication that have when we try to explain our theory that has to do with African people, specifically Congo. And you have traditions of syncretism, creolization back to colonial European, specifically in the context of Portugal and Spain's the famous Santos Apalos, or wooden saints. Very important in the Catholic Church in places like Portugal and Spain and Italy, and also very important in the understanding and application of the Congo ideas in the diaspora, but also very important in the actual Congo systems. This example of those wooden saints, and sometimes we think that you cannot find an Nkisi and Kondi in Cuba, and they mean that tradition that doesn't exist. That idea of fetish is very important in the way we understand how to be an object that quantifies, that represent that tradition. And this is an example from Lydia Cabrera from 1875 from the Guanabacoa Museum that showed a different type of kisi, but I just wanted you to focus on the actual figure. One example of this understanding of the metaphor I mentioned before about the idea of a car, rather than to think in this idea of you need to find, and the resemblance is very important in the way we assess the field of the study, rather than to understand how the principle that allow that object to exist. And these are examples of dolls that you will find in voodoo is very prominent, also very important in the Congo tradition in Cuba. Dolls that replaces the original morphology, anthropomorphic aesthetic of the original Nkisi and Kondi. But we never even think this kind of object can articulate this idea of Nkisi and Kondi because the dolls are Western things. Or and in the case of Brazil, so using a particular object to bring in that association with the Kongo principle. But these are the three examples from Portugal. This is present-day Embassy Congo, and this is Brazil. Pretty much they are in the similar lines. And there is a problematic, very controversial collector, his name Mark Felix. And I show this object, he said, how could it be this object Congo that doesn't look like traditional Congo? Because the idea of a Congo art had to look like the quintessential object we being promoted to research for all of disciplines. But one important notion in Congo art is the notion of contract and kandu. And the idea of contract is this relationship between a priest, or I don't even call it priest, it's an expert. It has a knowledge-based practice. It's someone who has a particular set of knowledge. That commitment between that person, the client, and the vitalities that have to be bring into that relationship to fix or to solve the problem, called encanto, that complex relationship called encanto in the Congo tradition in Cuba, and also in the Congo tradition among the Congo Sansala in Angola and in the border between the DRC. But I just brought this arbitrary, more kind of Laman style, to separate the type of contract, but they are not, you don't separate them. They just give you the sense of how different type of contract you can find that can be associated with vegetation and plants. It would be more like kind of like a doctor, the way you think about someone who cure illness. The contract has to do with animals and represents nature and the vitality of the cosmos and nature as a space of the source of vitality, the called Minongo in the Congo tradition. And the third one has to do with natural events like earthquake, tornado, hurricanes. So that kind of force can be quantified and represented through an activity. The one has to do with the mystery of the mind, so more in the kind of Hegel style. That has to do with psychology and mental dreams specific. It's very important in the training, becoming Alexander. Other ones is the mix of all of them, that is really what happened in reality at the end of the day. But this is an example, we believe, when we go to the Metropolitan Museum, there is an exhibition right now put together by Alicia Lagana about the Congo art, and everyone thinks it's the most powerful, beautiful, a comprehensive exhibition of Congo art, and in a way reinforce this idea of the type of object we associate with the Congo aesthetic, and that for me could be problematic. But there are important things that I think that being sufficient explained through the years. This is an example from Charlie Denison, who used to own a collection. He used to own the company MetLife in New York, and he collects art throughout his life, and he donated to Yale. And those both belong to him. And when I was cataloging this particular crucifix, I asked to remove one of the tag, and I sent it to the lab, and in the hole of the crucifix I found 21 example evidence of medicine that being placed in the hole. That made you think about the crucifix, the quintessential example of the power of Christianity in a way. You don't have to reinforce that. It's already that notion comes with the iconography of the object. You have an interesting contamination that you have an object that somehow had to be completed. And this is the way this Congo understanding of a religious object come into question here. And finding those examples of medicine placed in the holes. And that resemble from the nsonso, nails, in the Kongo Sansala, that mean profound thought or idea that also replaced here by the text. And I can go more in detail in the design of the dress, the club, the design of the wings blowing down. It will take a long time. But the idea of the nails, I think, is very important as an idea, as an important aesthetic. We hold that as the most critical aesthetic that represents the Congo tradition, the idea of a king and kings and Kondi. And this is an example of X-rays found in Maryland in the 1700s that show inside the container there are a lot of objects, including quark and the nails in part of that. But the Robert Farris Thompson wrote, when he wrote about the Nkisi and Kongo in the Detroit Museum, he wrote in his essay the description of different type of design of the nails and explained the logic of the nailing into the object. And this is all the name he used. That gets a kind of proximity to understanding if there is an object that has vitality, how that vitality function, how you make that object work. We just say it, but so it's very difficult to explain it. And I think that gets close to try to explain how that vitality operates within the universe of the object by trying to understand the specific process that empower that object, specifically nails and different type of nails of blades, made of iron, wood. This is an example from one of my heroes, Karl Lamans, and I'm trying to understand that this idea of belonging or medicine. What is that? What is so important in understanding Kongo art that being signaled through his field notes in his notebook. This is an example from Plaza, when you can find traditional medicine, where you can even buy cloth, you can buy pretty much everything. This is, you go to a plaza, you can buy food. Also, you can buy the food for the Nkisi in a different sense. And pretty much that kind of continuity from Laman into the present day is pretty much clear. But the idea of in the case of Kongo understanding Congo-specific African traditions, it's been somehow marked by these two negatives, this idea of sources of origin that have to do with Africa. And the second one has to do with anti-realite, is the descent that believe Africa had to be defined by understanding the relationship with other culture and diaspora. And we are pretty much trapped between these two paradigms. And I propose pretty much maybe to look at the relationship between the both, because there is, or maybe go beyond this idea of a continuity as not only one destiny. Well, this is an example from rock painting I encountered in 50 miles away from in the rainforest in Angola, right? Pretty much technically would be the Congo. And I'll show you, this is my drawing from, so I do in the iPad in doing my research, but this is the one to show a pregnant woman. And I just wanted to show you the importance of telling the story and the proverbs and what I call verbal tradition. I don't like to use oral tradition. It's just giving a sense of how you, rock painting in this case, specifically in the Angola context, the relationship between the digital quality of the engravings and the oral verbal articulation, they come together, they complement each other. It's very unique in my case from that. You will find a kind of relationship in other places when you move south to Namibia. But in a way, rock painting becomes a place that articulates this idea of cultural belonging, memory, culture, specificity, moral value, ethic. And an idea of the prototype that is somehow we believe is more in tune with traditional anthropomorphic object on the rise, the modern child, that is even the term we use that are embedded in the history of Western art. That in a way is depicted in the Congo tradition in a completely different way. But even the tiny changes in the depictions, specifically the relationship between the child and the mother, change the reading of these objects. Even when you are co-opting or maybe relating your own aesthetic with a Western European tradition, you have a sense of agency in a way, those aesthetics being implemented and deployed to articulate important Congo things and principles. And you have a distinction when the baby is completely separated, it has to do with the balance, or when the baby is stuck in the breast, it's just about protection. So it's the kind of tiny changes that change the. Well, even you can see, where European kind of even claims the idea of maternity is incredibly important for them, the idea of maternity being back from Egyptians' representation. And you can see all the way to the present day in Congo. But even when you think about this idea of continuity that in a way is being very important, like someone like I'm a Sir, but I'm sorry for descent or African origin, I'm a Sir. And this is an example from Suriname and Nkisi that's been found in, by two professors from Harvard. And you can see the relationship between iconography, the aesthetic, that is somehow is placed back to the similar kind of aesthetic principle found in Nkisi and Kongo on the right in Central Africa. The difference here, the object never been sent back to the Samaka people in the Suriname, they've been only sent the photograph as thanks of retribution to the Kongo tradition. It's kind of funny, instead of to give back the object. But the idea of what I think the three principle, a key principle that have to do with, I think important in the Kongo tradition is the idea of vitality, secrecy, and totality. Totality is nature, secrecy is a kind of knowledge, vitality is belong with what, empower the object itself. It has to do with a particular shape, the triangle. That there is an object that articulates this idea, the Makuku, Makato, Malamika, and the Kongo, and it has to do with the free Congos and the cooking stones that is important to build the family and the village. And you can see the free stone here. It's actually the three legs we find in the Kongo continent in Cuba. This is a take in Brazil. It's very interesting. This idea of the stone they are speaking, that is an important proverb in the Kongo, in Kongo, that talk about three rocks. They are running through the forest, and all the time they collide, they decide to talk. When they talk, they highlight a particular proverb, a moral lesson. This is a kind of interpretation of a three-dimensional object in a three-dimensional graphic motif in Brazil. It's a very clever reconstruction of a common principle that has to do back to these three key concepts. When you think about the idea of a Nkisi, an important term used, it's a term you find in the Metropolitan Museum, this is being used. And Nkisi comes from the kinsa, that means to take her, is the root, the verb, that have to do with the term Nkisi. I'm saying about Foucault and Seki. But the idea of Nkisi has this kind of duality, synchronic, things happen every day, so things happen, yet chronic, happen only one time, and Nkisi has this capacity to do that. Or the duality of that kind of vitality, power has to do with spiritual forces or medicine that solves basic problems like malaria and illness. But the field work need for a new term for Nkisi. When you go into this idea of Nkisi, that have this kind of global nature, the skins on inside, the flesh and the skin, so you can make another way to interpret that. But the idea of Nkisi is more like earth in miniature, and all the vitalities contain earth, the planet, the one we inhabit. They are placed in that container, what we call Nkisi. That's another way to interpret that. But the term that people use in Kongo, all the way to Luvu, is the last village between. You can find it in Ngangangu and Bansangungu. It's 10 miles into the Kongo side. The term they use is Mpungu. They don't use Nkisi. Nkisi is a particular type of object. And Mpungu that have multiple meanings that mean stick together. That is the meaning of Mpungu and Mpungu. That replaced for them, they never use the term Nkisi as far as I know. But the Mpungu comes from supreme, that is, and Sambi Mpungu is the term for God that you can find in Kongo, or Almighty God. Or it could be a great power of survival, of self-sacrifice, of great expectations. It's all the connotation you would find in relation to the term Mpungu that moved away from the previous definition of Nkisi as a futu. The futu is a container of a medicine that empower our life itself. But important for Kongo people is recording history and how history is recorded. I think it's in a way we go back into this idea, if you have a history, you have a way to record that history, and we have language as an example. And the kind of fetish relationship we have with language is kind of problematic and a war for European culture, but sometimes it doesn't really apply to But what I call the first narrative had to do with this is all the sites I walked during my research since 1999, when I landed in Kongo. UNITA, the rebel group, was 5 kilometers around the city, and it was my first trip to Kongo lands before, this is my kind of pseudo-Kongo space in Cuba. But this is all the places I've been doing research in the last, for more than 10 years. And given a sense, an idea of migration is very important in the way we think about cultural continuity, not just in the diaspora, continuity within the African context. And the idea of migration along the coastline I haven't really found any kind of evidence that proves that kind of migration. What I found here on the right through rock paintings that separated each of the sites 10 miles from each other. That plays an important question: why you need to stop every 10 miles when you are looking through, because you cannot walk in straight lines, you're just walking through zigzag or in a spiral mode. Pretty much all the sites I've been notating. This is just a drawing from my research, and just giving a sense, pretty much a pretty theory about migration from Boma, Matali. It doesn't work. I haven't found yet any kind of evidence that proves that kind of migration all on the coastline. Pretty much you're coming through the rainforest, into the gallery forest, into the savanna. That is pretty much the last ecosystem before you get to the desert in Mozambique desert, in the border between Angola and Namibia. What you can use also writing to talk about governments. This is an example from my research. Kumbi is the name of that particular site. And I'm showing a very complex iconic narrative is the way I internally use it right now. But it shows an incredible, all-made, multiple layers of depictions and meanings. So I just want to show you a little bit what they mean. And Ndembo is a very important social, political structure in the Kongo tradition in the present day, but being there for more than 500 years. And Ndembo has to do with what I call historical government. And pretty much you have a rock painting. This is just a contained view of a rock painting that unfolds the way that governments operate and being depicted, being used to the people to remember the principle of this type of government and form of but even every narrative has, I think, 3 important elements. They have an event, they have an action. An event is a case that has to be presented through the lumbu, is a traditional paramount court in the Kongo that has been there for the last 500 years. The action that had to be responded by the elders to solve the problem, when the system of law used in Angola cannot solve the problem of land dispute in that particular society. And the descriptions, there is a record that had to be and it's somehow calculated in an oral form in the songs, or can be now in the present day is transcribed in a paper. Pretty much it's the lumbu, then will show you through rock painting in a way, so you can memorializing that particular form of government for eternity for people to remember. Well, they are a memory, and it has to do with what I call verbal tradition, oral traditions. And this is an example when you have different sections, the whole drawing represents particular program, but different sections also articulate all the type of program that complement the original one. And I guess, put an example from Kongo Sansala, and the translation is the elder whose brain is coming to his head and being poured through his body. And there's a series of moral lessons that have to be understood at the time you look at this particular program as a graphic form, what we call rupescent or rock painting. And this is just to give a better drawings that give a clearer idea of the depictions. Place and space. This is being published by Robert Forrest Thompson. It's part of the Tervuren collection. And when I saw this object, this depiction, I asked Thompson, and he wrote a little bit about this object. But didn't give a really clear idea of what that means, what is the meaning of these graphic depictions. And I took it back to Antino Zagnabuna, who was the paramount chief of Kongo, Lungu is the traditional power base. And he explained the name of this drawing is Tabidi Asimbi. And there's a narrative, that explains this object, this particular depiction is being used to train the king, the new king, for 4 years before he take over as a government. That is the explanation here to me. I said, well, how it really works, and so it has to do with 7 different places that the kings in training had to go in order to acquire important knowledge. And in order to explain that to you, I had to split something that should not be read in that, fragmented way. And I told you about important skill and knowledge the king had to, the king in training had to acquire before take position. And I just give you a sense here, all the different parts. But the problem for me is really how do you create that meaning? How, in the case in the system we use, like Spanish, Portuguese, or French, the verb is a command that gives a vitality to the sentence. And here, the sigma type of logic is being followed here. This is the way we explain it, is square in the middle, but really articulate all the different meaning in that drawing as a whole. And also represent the 4 cardinal points that is very important in the Kongo cosmology. But, and this is the different stages that have to be followed that give the power to that object. Well, recording time is very important. And it's just a funda and fina and tuta. Also, this is in the Kongo size. And this is the size, the priest, it was a Protestant priest. During the civil war, he was living in Kongo, and he stopped in the middle of the forest and he found this rock. And they had to go with him and retrieve back my memory like 35 years later. But I just want to show you something that I think is important to you. And when I started looking at the depiction of particular holes, what they call hammers motif, and started trying to understand because you have like 200 of them in place, and many of the people explained that they had to do with recording times. Sometimes about the person who owned the place and the age. 61 is when that person who owned that place died. And also the association with the program. You have this particular notation of the life of a human being, and also the programs and how allow you to remember that. And you can see the combination of the digit and along the horizontal and the vertical, all of them together, you can get to 61. But I bring back this idea of time, and the idea of time is very important in the Kongo tradition. Is the day, is the Lumbu's day, Domingo week, and Gonde month or period, and who is the year of the cycle. And this is all the different periods that have to do between the dry season, rain season, and winter. And the day, the week is organized by 4 days. And you can go back, you can see the relationship, the distribution throughout the year between the dry season and winter. And here, you can go back as far as 1766, Jean Cavalier talking about the Kongo understanding of the week in 4 days. In a way, go back to these clear contradictions being encountered by European specific outside understanding, conflicting with this new quantification of time that have to do with the period of 4 days instead of 7. Just to give you a flavor of the complexity of the time and the comparison between the Kongo calendar versus the Gregorian calendar, and only pretty much they match. Three-dimensional writings is that we think sometimes writing is digital. It has a very specific connotation. And this is a panela you can find in Cabinda. And this is a represented relationship between husband and wife. And there are 100,000 of them in this type of object interviewed. But I've been looking all this object until I found that one that was different from everything else. And I just wanted to show you here the panela is the kind of statement the wife had to make to the husband had to do with issues of marriage, household problems in the marriage. And the husband, when he come back for dinner, had to be able to quote the cover a pot. And to show you here the two types of statement. The statement, she's guessing what her husband will say back to her, and it's what she's telling to him. And this is the final conclusions of the, and number 5 is the word as a verb, that particular, and tampu is, November is a fruit, that means, give action to the iconography. Without that object, the object cannot mean anything. I'll just give you the sense as a writing two-dimensional object is an example, very famous, of, haven't really been studied as far as I know. And the idea for writing on vacation is something being mentioned by Foucault throughout his lectures, and I think because in the Kongo tradition, this idea of you don't die, you just go on vacation, and the idea of memorializing times through a particular object, kind of we call funerary tradition, mortuary tradition. But here you have pretty much all the temple. This is my friend, Barbaro asked me to write about this particular object because Thompson wrote about that in the 80s, and he wanted completely different writing from the original from Thompson. And I asked him to take a photograph from inside because I saw a couple of these particular Bibondo pieces, and they have this kind of depiction. You can see not just the layering of a particular object, also the different kind of iconography being depicted inside in an infrared photograph. You can see the idea of back to Ndembo is another term also, the similar term that we had to do with government also had to do with the kind of training to become a leader or a king or a village chief. And this is from Kawasi in the 16th century. It's the only depiction so far I know back to the early time, historical time, that showed that Ndembo was like a fake mummification of a leader. They had to pass out for 9 days. They had to rest in a horizontal, and the family had to feed him until he acquired this particular set of plant that had to be burned to neutralize this person, the physical. He can move, but he can see, he can hear the whole thing. This is the representation from Kawasi. This is pretty much what you have here. And I just want to give you the sense, the meaning of the different gestures, and Saka Saka, many problems, Malvinki, delight or joy, is happy to go on vacation, to honor spiritual things. And the other important thing that they have to do with the actual mortuary tradition in the Kongo. And the idea of a threshold of the door, or gesture specific, Jangalala or Jangalele ecstasy. You can find in the design on the top, you can find this, for me, an important image. This is 1828 in Portugal, the city to have more than 30% of the population used to be from Central Africa. The image is what I wanted to use, African people going to church. But the lady, she is in ecstasy, and the gesture, we call the Jangalala. And the gesture from the left is the person is in a position called Yenga. I mean, I am the light, I melted my body into the music. You can see the relationship and the statement that come only through body language. He's saying, inviting her, and she's saying yes, and they're going in the African way, going to church. And that is kind of interesting. And you have an example from, and again, you have a echo, the similar kind of motif iconography in rock painting present day. And the final one is this idea of a buhungu, this perfect beings, being described by Foucault Noseki, and that beings being created by God, but didn't have any kind of feeling. It had to be split in order to behave like a human. So that kind of Janus depictions is very important in that conceptualization of perfection and perfect beings in the Kongo tradition, that in a way represented here in the funerary work, and also in the Kizio Kongo. This is from McGuffey work. You cannot see well, but it's that. And again, this idea of ascending multiple layers of assistance that is very important in the Kongo tradition, how you acquire spiritual knowledge. That started with a perfect circle, similar to the Nganga in Brazil. And he is enclosing himself into a circle. He is complete, he is perfect, and he is sent up to perfection on the top. And you can find this idea of a lungu made of a palm leaf. When you walk into your house, you have to be cleansed. And this is an example from Dapper. And this is a so-called thrust from the Kongo. Mandombe, it just go back from two-dimensional ephemeral writing into more critical writing. And I have with Ramon Saro, who is the expert in Mandombe. But the Mandombe is translate like the black script or black secret. Palio Walalio in 1978 he invented in a dream. There are many African writings that have been created in dreams. And also he's connected back to the family. To tell you the importance of a syllabary, a writing system is based in the syllabary. This is an example from a newspaper in Kinshasa. And this is pretty much like Rosetta Stone of the Mandombe writing. You can see Linda, Kongo, and Swahili. The same writing notate any kind of sound human can make in the entire world. It's so clever, so flexible. And I show you here the publication of Mandombe writing in 3 different languages in Kinshasa. But the basic of this writing is basically the idea of digits and the Greek. And this is the first one, and this is the second one. The one from start, and this one, the one rectangular. And the entire system is displayed in these designs. And they have to do the name of the whole depiction is being translated as 5 and 2. And according to the people who study and trained in Simon Kimpangu Church and BDK, they believe it's not really 5 and 2. It's about S that has to do with the Simbi spirit. It's an interesting association. But the idea of Bakundungu Pelekete is a particular drumming pattern. In a way, the music had the graphic writing system we call Mandombe had to do with the language of music, specific drumming language. But and here, this is a particular name of the position and the circle that told you the beginning of the writings that pretty much echo the similar type of writing you would find in Vevey in Haiti. And even you can go to someone like Jackson Pollock in his action paintings. When you start the writing, you cannot stop in a way. It's a kind of vitality. It has to do with the process of making meanings, creating meanings. And the idea of physical dimension is very important in Mandombe. The material manifestation, it can be translated into building design. And you can make objects, you can build a house. And the psychological expression, you can communicate. And the placement and proximity is very important in that a language that is designed to notate sounds. And this is pretty much one example of a D, the letter D. This is when you start writing the letter D all the way to 11 in the last one. And this is an example as a syllabary, D and A, da. It's a combination of A, and it's how it's replaced in the system. Just give you an example, the complexity. Making meanings. I just want an example how I write my name. I hope this, okay. This is my name. There are Kimpungu, after all. This is kind of informal archaeology. Because many people believe the Kongo tradition, died and disappeared because, in one hand, being burned, every century being, burned by very specific earth society. And this is like objects being found in houses in Kongo for the last 15 years, and people just are covering when they're doing construction in the house. Each of them, they have a very specific name, and you can trace back to other objects. But this is the first type of kisi that is being used in present day in what is the Masa Kongo Zaire province, Kinyumba and Mumba. And this is an example of Kinuma and Bumba have four different manifestations. This is the ones that brings all the medicine together in that pottery. I just want to give an example of this belonging of this traditional. The place you go, and there's 51 type of medicine cataloged and organized, and each of them have a particular type of meaning. This is an example of the type of Kisi and Pungu depicted before. And you can have the ones Kangi Genso is the one to protect the house, and you have to place in the 4 cardinal points of the house. This is what I need to have for my house in Capetown. You have to go to 2 electric fences, beams, double glazed door, alarm inside, and after that you have to face this. I hope that will protect my wife who's now in Capetown. Kangi di Anitu, that is when you cut and have markings and you inscribe through a specific type of digital marking in your body, and you create a medicine that plays inside. The lungu is protecting the whole land, and the one is the body used to protect the body itself, the body language. And this is just an example of 21 ingredients that go inside. This is exactly the principle. You need to have 21 pairs of leaf and plants, and each one per count as one. This is exactly what you have in the Kongo tradition present day. It's just listed here for you to get a sense of the tradition. They are more in the conversation rather than moving apart. And 21 ingredients in the Kongo tradition, 21 is what you still have to do in Cuba, in the Cuban style. Pungu and Kama is translated 100 power. This is and it's a mortar, and the Italian medicine is placed inside. And what you have important is knottings. It's very important. Replace the nailings you find in the early Kisi Kondi. What you have here is the idea of a circle is very prominent and represented before cardinal point is the essential idea of ascending from a circle to another circle. Also is very important. And the lock here that replaced these nails in the Kisi Kondi. Well, Masita is what is being used in the present day to signify the vitality that takes place in Pungu in the Kongo context. And Masita has to do with also back to the idea of 3 physical spaces, with 3 understanding of the Kongo tradition, and different type of Zita and Kita and Ken and Kanga, just one knot. Masita only 3, Akato 3. Zita the Akanga is a butterfly and is a monkey feast. That is they're just giving a sense how you tie up this Menkisi. You don't use the nails anymore. What you do is that particular knotting tradition with the kapi, particular type of grass. And he's someone making a demonstration to him. This is a different type of knotting technique you can find in the present day. This is a tour I show you in what you can do with the logic of knotting in a very specific fashion. Just give it a sense of the complexity of that pretty much replaced, or didn't replace, I think coexist with the idea of nailing. You will find in the traditional Kisi in Kondi. Kilongo view, just give it a sense of the present day, how it looked at space. And you have a different type of object coming together. It's more like looking into a voodoo house or a Kongo house in Cuba, or an Umbanda in Brazil, or Obia in Jamaica. And a different type of key, so you have from container all the way to anthropomorphic and zoomorphic after they coexist together in place. Here is few examples of the anthropomorphic one. They have to do more with object we found in the tourist shop in Luanda, outside Luanda. And sometimes we think it's being reused by the Kongo practitioner as an important quintessential object that revitalized the entire tradition. And the normal person who goes to that sees like the object, they think they cannot be inscribed in the traditional Kongo aesthetic. And Filu Bangu and then by south. Each specific name have particular meanings, and also there are type of vitalities you find in Arabic called zigbi, or a particular type of kisi and pungu. This is the only time you use the term kisi. I found the term kisi, or people use the term kisi that have to do with this particular type of pungu that have thousands of nuts. And the process of nutting is very, very important. It has to do with the dialectic changes an example also another kisi, Mwanshi, that means the destroyer. And here is the freshwater shelf. And it's an example of why is this pretty much in the Kongo, the similar type of Kongo tradition you will find in the diaspora. There's 4 cardinal points, Simbi as a head, you will find in Mandonga writing, also come back here on the cross. It's given us in a sense. And an object that has to do with present day tourist art in the way that sometimes we demonize this type of object, that we really use it in that particular context. And the final one, I think, is Kinzu Yamawutu. The idea of a circle is important. And when we have this space, the priest, the Nganga, is practicing in a circle. He's protected by the circle, in the case representing the sun, is what that means, Sungut from Tamil. And here, different type of keys is in that, on his disposal to do. From the one is Sungwu, is the container of medicine when you prepare that medicine in order to be replaced with the other type of keys. And the last one, it has to do more with the kind of object we think they are completely innocent and they don't have any kind of power, and a cane. And you have a combination of pretty much all the visual tradition coming together here, and the idea of the hands, the body language that we saw in the original, in the few examples back in the rock painting or in the print in Portugal, come here and important the hands that could be maybe read as the hands of God, but in this case it has to do with the unity of the Kongo being perfect. You are in control of your surrounding, a physical space around you. All the way to something like representing the snake, nyoka, and dungu, that is protect the entire narrative that has to do with the statement about power and social organization. So pretty much what you have here is a perfect circle back to an African diaspora. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Barbaro, for this fascinating introduction to the topic and to this oceanic view of the Congo domain, which in many ways also exemplifies many Africanist topics and discussions that I'm sure we will be discussing these days. I'll just make quite a general comment rather than going into the logics of writing Mandombe, which we can discuss later, but I was very, very happy to see that someone else is able to write their name in Mandombe. First of all, I want to say a very, very general point, not about the talk, but about the conference. As an anthropologist, I'm very happy about this conference, because I just received 3 calls for panels for 3 conferences, very, very important. The EASA conference in anthropology, the ASA conference in anthropology, and the Portuguese Association of Anthropology, which is huge because it includes many Brazilians. And the 3 conferences have as a topic the future. And I think that we anthropologists are skeptical towards the future. We are now fascinated by the future. Many years ago, I remember my friend and esteemed colleague David Berliner wrote an article called The Abuses of Memory, in fact denouncing that there has been an abuse of the anthropology of memory and uses and metaphors about memory. And I think that people took David's provocation too seriously, and now there is this fascination for a kind of a futuristic astrology and projection towards aspirations and hopes and imaginations of the future from an anthropological point of view. And I think that a bit too much has been made of it in the last at least 4 or 5 years. So I was very happy when I got this call, which went on the other direction. and which reminded us that if we want to study imaginations about the future, like the messianic movements I study in Congo, we have to understand the historical roots, the historical depth, the way memory plays a very important role in actually accumulating images and creating images that people may or may not project into the future. I think that it's very, very positive that this, one of the first events, or maybe the first event, I don't know, of this Center of the Study of Civilizations and the African Study Center is about reminding us of the importance of studying the past. And some days ago, Mike and I were provoked by a very good colleague and friend of ours who said, "Oh, you're studying the Mande and the Yoruba and the Congo, and you call it deep culture, deep history? All these units were invented at the end of the 19th century." And of course that was a provocation that we have to respond to without being essentialist, of course. But I think that we are well equipped to do so and to answer the challenge. And I would like to invite people to read or to reread or to do it after this conference and then link it to the conference. A very important text in the history of anthropology and of social sciences, which was Marcel Mauss' essay on the notion of civilization. Or the article that a short piece that he wrote almost 15 years earlier with his uncle Durkheim, also on civilization. And my reading of that piece of Marcel Mauss actually resonates with another text written at the very beginning of the 20th century, and which is absolutely crucial to the understanding of social sciences, which is Ferdinand de Saussure's course on linguistics. And the reason why I'm invoking Saussure is because Saussure uses an image that I think is very, very powerful. It's almost one of these visual metaphors that make you think beyond anything you had thought before. And he uses the image when he's talking about the distinction that he introduces, as you know, between synchrony and diachrony that we have seen in Barbaro's paper. And the image that he uses, many of you may remember it, is that of the stem of a tree. Sorry, of a plant. It's not a tree. I think it would be much more interesting if it was a tree, but he doesn't use a tree. He uses a plant. And then he says, well, if we cut the stem verticality, what we see is the fibers in its depth, and then we can study the fibers and the lines by themselves. And if we cut it transversely, we study the connections between the different fibers. And this is very much what Marcel Mauss would say in his essay on civilization. That what he means by civilization is the way fibers connect among themselves, creating different configurations and different units that may crystallize in an ethnicity or may not, and may just become one of these supra-ethnic concepts, like the three that we are analyzing in this conference come to that. And there is a very interesting rereading of Saussure's bifurcated image by Levi-Strauss, who then says that there is in social sciences a principle of uncertainty similar to Heisenberg's principle of uncertainty. We either focus on temporality and change and directionality, or we focus on the structure, which then becomes atemporal, which is of course his point of view. But in fact, if you read Saussure properly, what Saussure is saying is that the two images and the two cuts have to be complementary. We cannot just do synchrony, we cannot just do diachrony. We have to see how the two complement. I think that this is what anthropology has been trying to do over the last at least 20 or 30 years. So, having said that, I think that Barbaro's talk is a very, very good example of this bifocal analysis. He has followed the fibers. He has followed some specific fibers in particular, like for instance images of the Madonna, or images of the crucifixion, or of course the most shocking of them all for visitors to the north part of Angola, Sant Antonio, which is one of the most popular saints in Lisbon, or the fiber of writing And in fact, many of the things he has said about writing are going to be very important in my own analysis of Mandombe. When I started to study Mandombe, I have to confess that I was doing the transversal cut. I was just looking at Mandombe in itself. And when people said, "Oh, you have to read Barbaro Martinez-Ruiz work on pre-colonial science," I was like, "No. Mandombe, Mandombe was born in 1978, as Barbaro has said. It has nothing to do with pre-colonial symbols." But in fact, one of the most important elements of Mandombe is that the first drawing that people have to do when learning Mandombe, it's not actually a word. It's a drawing of a man who, or a person anyway, could be a woman actually, but everybody says it's a man who's got his hands like that, and then you realize. And in fact, a man who's called Nkwatulendo, which means the powerful. And the Mandombe practitioners minimize this fact, and they say, well, just a man, and we call it Nkwatulendo. But then if you go and read Barbaro Martinez-Ruiz, you realize of the importance that this position has in Congo culture, the Yangalala, as he has reminded us, and the importance of the name of Nkwatulendo. And how this resonates in people's minds, how this awakes messianic hopes, how this awakes notions of deep pastness. So I think that the way that Barbaro has been following these fibers is very, very faithful to this proposal that I'm inheriting from Susil, and also through Marcel's work on civilizations. But then he also does the transversal cut, and he looks at the configurations that the different fibers create today in Banza Congo and in the different places. And by the way, I want to prize here one aspect of Barbaro that hasn't sufficiently been noted by our colleagues, which is the ethnographic side of Barbaro. I mean, he's an art historian, but he has done field work in the most difficult parts of Banza Congo, and also in the most difficult times of Angola. And this has to be highlighted because one of the most important things that Barbaro has told us is a thing that he has minimized himself, but I think that you guys were probably as shocked, or, well, not as shocked, but almost as shocked as I was when I encountered this reality in the field in Banza Congo itself, which is the fact that people in northern Angola don't use the concept of Nkisi. So we've been reading about Bakongo since the works of Wyatt and many others. We know how central this concept of Nkisi is. There has been many works on fetishism in Africa and theories of fetishism based on the concept of Nkisi. You arrive in Banza Congo, the heart of the Congo culture, and the concept that people say, what is Nkisi? And you think you're mispronouncing it, but then you realize that in fact you're not mispronouncing it, it just doesn't have the value that you think it has. It has a different value, as Barbaro has said, of one specific kind of concept, but it's not the concept that is invoked. And this actually, I say this because in fact in the study of civilizations, the ethnographic method is very, very important, because the Bakongo of Banza Congo are very different from the Bayombe, for instance, who live in the forest of the Republic of Congo and the Democratic Republic of Congo, far away from Angola. Well, there are some Bayombe in Cabinda, but not many. Or the people in Cabinda who are not Mayombe, or other ethnic groups. And you may remember, if you have read a person who is one of our ancestors in this house, Mary Douglas, that in fact she says that the Lewe consider themselves Bakongo as well. So what the hell is this unique Congo? Well, it's many things. It may be an empty concept, signifiant flottant. It may be a reality. It is something at some point, but it also depends very much on the, let's say, lexicality, or the position of the speaker at one particular moment. And Barbaro is very good at reminding us that we have to look at the configuration, we have to look at the transversal cut, and see that the Bakongo of the Banza-Sala, the Bakongo of Banza Congo are very, very different from the Bayombe, and very different from the people who were taken to the Americas, although there as well we find a particular configuration of fibers that remind us and that can be considered part of the Congo universe. So I think that one thing that Barbaro has pointed out with this analysis is how important it is to pay attention to what we could maybe rephrase as the dual logics of enclosure and encompassment. I mean, there is this insistence on enclosure, on recipients, on containers, but then there is this fractality, this mathematicity of, you know, the triad, it's the household, but it's also the three lineages that make a clan, and the three clans that make a unit, and the three tribes that make a province, and eventually the three countries that make the Kongo kingdom of, you know, Angola, the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the Republic of Congo. And this fractality of threes just goes from the very, very particular to the universal. So you've got these logics of expansion, of centrifugality, and these logics of centrifugality going on at the same time. Logics of encompassment and logic of closure. And of course, encompassment may have a negative tone, and this is something that we will have to deal with in our different case studies as well. One thing that Marcel says in his essay on civilization that I want to remind, I'm going to close now, is that we do not have to study the making of civilization through the prism of mimesis, mimes, of imitation, which was the model that Gabriel Tarde, who was the great enemy of the Turkinian tradition, was proposing. Because he says that if we do that, then we are only observing at how people adopt things from outside and what the logics of adoption are. But that what the anthropologists have to do, or what the sociologists have to do, is to study the logics of rejection as well. To study at what point people tell you, like you know, many in Kongo have told me in Kongo, the Bible is our enemy, for instance. It's something that some leaders of prophetic churches say. I mean, they really oppose the Kongo tradition to the Christianity that came to oppress them and to kill the prophets, and I'll talk about that tomorrow. So my comments have just been opening up a debate about the logics of civilization making and rereading Barbaro's talk on that line, and of course we'll be presenting him as well. I apologize. I'm just opening debates for the next day. If I wanted to have two critical questions or provoke him to tell us something more particular about elements that I thought could have been explored, and I'm sure that he has explored them in other parts of his immense scholarship and writings, is one, who are the agents of creation? You've talked about Wabeladio Pai, who invented Mandombe, but who are the creative individuals in Congo culture, and what value do they have? I mean, could we reintroduce this kind of Dacevedo preoccupation for the artists in Congo inventors, or are we to assume that, you know, Congo tradition just reproduces itself through this Levi-Straussian unconscious mind? And my second question would be, going back to my, you know, are the Lele Bakongo or not, Mary Douglas question, who are the agents of definition? Who establishes who the Bakongo are and what the limits of the Congo domain are? Of course, I know that, you know, some of the prophets I've been studying are very active agents of definition, but then these definitions are also contested within the community itself. So I would like to hear something about that if possible. But I think I'll shut up because I've been talking too much. Thank you.
Who are the creators of the Congo present day? It's kind of a tricky question because since I think 1999, so that, I've been pretty much going back every year, except 2 years of just skip for personal reasons. The first things I encounter in the way the government is organized in Mbazo Congo is the rejections of what they call Makisisi. This is the term they use for traditions, or they can also be used as a term to describe a religious form. The Makisisi means what is proper of the place. And there is a rejection, strong rejection from the government, and there's a campaign that started with going to every single house, and every Nganga Maoku in the Kongo had to register in a list, and in a way they control, and you're not allowed to practice as an Nganga or Ngudi, as is a woman. And then you have a very clear sense of repression that comes from the government looking into their own tradition, because most of the people in the government, they are Bakongo. They're born, many of them in that place, they went to Rwanda overseas, but they understand that tradition, they speak the language. And you have also the other side is that Moses' tradition has been demonized by the Catholic Church, by the Protestant Church. And you have, I think, the first area of innovations, of understanding, I think, comes through the Messianic movement. It's an Pevra Church, the BDK, and Simon Kimpangu. Each of the three understanding of all, each of the three movement, Kongo tradition is vital to them, but the interpretation, they are very, very different. The Pevelongo understand is defined by hybridity. And the Simon Kimpangu Church that has to do is more in synchrony with the Protestant movement, in a way. And BDK, Bunda de Kongo, is very ideological. It's based in this essence of Kongo tradition that is placed in an original source, that Kongo is retreat back in the past. And the BDK has the right to recreate this Kongo tradition that used to be 100 years ago. But each of them uses the same language, uses the same motif, the same, many of the aesthetic they share, including the BDK and the Simon Kimpangu Church. They use Mandonga writing. There's a lot of cross-fertilization between them. I think for me, the first area would be the kind of Messianic movement and the informal churches, including botanical houses in Kongo. There are more religion formed in northern Angola than any other places I've been, and independent parties and things. But that would be one area. The second one is kind of informal practice that take place in a kind of private space when the people, they have a kind of dual, I think it's a kind of dual ontology in a way. They are Catholic, but at the same time, when they have a critical problem like malaria and all this kind of thing, they go to the Makizinsi, the tradition. And that is a kind of similar kind of mindset you will find in the diaspora. The expression in Cuba say, if you don't find a problem as a doctor, you have to walk. I mean, you just go to a traditional doctor or an Uganda. And I think that is an area that in a way, this tradition will retreat and hide into the private space, the domestic space of many of the households in Pacific, in the Masa Kongo area. And the third one is like to do more research, field work, out in the forest or in different villages, and try to understand the history of a place by understanding how the people remember this place. They come from a verbal account, also come with a material evidence. They are there, but somehow this sense of distrust that comes with someone arriving to that place. It takes 10 years to really open up and give information. I think the lack of research in the place, I think is something that in a way jeopardizes the understanding what is that Kongo tradition. What are the spaces in which, and also you have all the kind of spaces for me are neutral, like Paradise neighborhood. It's like 5 million people live in Paradise neighborhood in Rwanda, and it's like recognized as a Kongo. It's almost like a city. And you wanted to understand about, you don't even have to go to Kongo, you can go to Paradise neighborhood. It's in 1986, Paradise, and I went to Paradise, 1986. I was completely inundated with baobab trees and sandy soil, nothing there. And now it's like a huge city, in the dust, it's like that. When rain, you cannot get police, doesn't get you have this limitations even from another part of it. And that I think that kind of neutral space in which the Kongo had to be recreated and re-articulated in relation to all the type of culture that now Kongo and Bundu or Kimbundu. And that I think would be the third. Mm-hmm. And who are the agents of definition? I believe are the people who are, the expert in Congo. People are the Congolese, the Bakongo people. That is what I think. An expert in Congo had to be a Congo person. It's not even an art historian. That is what I believe. Mm-hmm. And I think there has to be an understanding and how those terms and those definitions, why they reappear at a certain moment in time, or changes in aesthetic, like the object, co-opting tourist object, present day. But it's not about the object itself, it's about a mindset that allows them to co-opt the object in a particular narrative that serves a very specific set of principles in the religion or in the cultural structure. And I think had to start from that to, in the way we write, I think we had to acknowledge the people, we had to give a prominent voice in the right, treat them as equal to us, or me in this case. Mm-hmm. I read back most of my work, when I go back and I read it back to people and I get feedback from them, and if I have a misunderstanding, they have the right, and I notate those misunderstandings, the footnotes. I think it's important for me to share this kind of knowledge with them, but that is the way I decide to do, because I believe that voice should have a space, within my own narrative. For me, it's very complicated because I believe I have a connection with the place because of my personal history. Mm-hmm. I share certain object that I use as a token to ease my relationship with them. I think they understand that. But that doesn't fit to other people. In my case, I know a graphic writing tradition, that there is a graphic writing tradition there, many of them, and not just one, a few of them. And I share my knowledge in certain symbols and signs, and I try to understand why and how, what is the logic, how you create meaning. That is what motivates me. And the logic of creating meaning in the Congo boundaries, specific framework, is very different from the way I create meaning. And that contradiction allowed me to make an argument that is on how to bring these two paradigms together, rather than to say, Congo, like 2 months ago was a big debate at UCT about transformations, and the head of the school called all the blacks of Africa to talk about transformation and said, we have Barbaro here, who is black. He's a professor and he wanted to teach African. I had to say, no, he's not a real black person. It was very open to me, and they say horrible things to me, but I wasn't there. But the head of the school came to me angry, because she didn't have really an explanation. I wasn't original enough. I wasn't a real black person. You have all this, that is somehow I confronting that is the very present day in a place like South Africa, in which there is a sense of purity and understanding, who has the right to be African, who has the right to be Congolese, who hold that culture, what are the reasons that allow you to define your relationship with something from Congo or Bakongo, or I am in Congo or I am not, or I am someone who is compromised by Western tradition. How you can create this, conversation and highlight this to, I think that my was